The world is a large and diverse place, a paradoxical place, a place of extraordinary beauty as well as extreme suffering, a place of lavish love as well as harrowing hate, a place of grace and flexibility as well as judgment and rigidity, a place of tolerance and acceptance as well as prejudice and exclusion. And it is in the messy middle of this world that we love and live and strive. It is here in the sanctuary of beloved community that we choose to relentlessly side with love. It is in the face of our current struggles that we nurture hope in ourselves and with one another. The poet Adrienne Rich wrote, "My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world." As we come together for worship today, honoring Juneteenth, the so-called end of slavery in the US, as well as LGBTQ Pride Month, let us take heart and summon courage for the ongoing work of making change and doing justice. Our gathering music for today is "A Change Is Gonna Come" by Sam Cooke.
Good morning. My name is Karma Amos, and I am honored to serve as the minister of the Unitarian Universalists of Central Delaware and to welcome you to worship this morning. Whether this is your first time with us or attending our Sunday services as part of your regular routine, we are so glad that you're here today, and we hope that you'll find room in this community for your spirit. We continue to be grateful for the technology that allows us to worship together online and to continue to build community in other ways. Thank you in advance for your patience and grace with any glitches we might experience. In addition to our worship each Sunday at 10, we meet on Tuesday nights at 7 for a more informal time of checking in and sharing. Please consider joining us for that gathering if you can. And by way of announcements today, I want to thank the Board of Trustees and all the members and friends of UUCD who attended our annual meeting last week. Well done, you. I want to let you know that there is a Social Environmental Justice Committee meeting today at noon, and there is a different Zoom link for that will be in our e-blast. And I also want to remind you that the tool shed will continue for the next 4 weeks on Thursdays at 6:30. The dialogues are rich, and I hope you'll register to attend. It doesn't matter if you haven't attended the first ones. This coming week will focus on police accountability and reform, and our presenters will come from the Delaware ACLU. And now, as we prepare ourselves for worship, I invite you to take a deep breath as we reaffirm, as we do each week, our intentions to be a radically welcoming community. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you've been, whatever you've done, whatever your religious beliefs are or aren't, you are welcome in this spiritual community. However you move in this world, how much or how little is in your bank account or your wallet, however you are feeling in this moment, you and all of who you are welcome in this spiritual community. We are all enhanced by being together.
The words of our chalice lighting this morning are adapted from Linda Lee Franson. We light this flame to ignite our heart and minds with the spark of knowledge that enlightens, the shimmering hope that burns, the blazing love that engulfs our actions, the bonfire of our commitment. We light this flame for those who celebrate themselves, who fear, who hope, who persevere, who side with love for all. We light this flame for those who have been ridiculed, that they may find peace, for those who have fought to marry, that they may celebrate, for those that have been oppressed, that they may find freedom and justice, for those who may live in uncertainty in the world, that they may have hope. We light this flame to renew our commitment that no one shall ever again suffer for who they are, for whom they love, for the color of their skin, for their religious heritage or beliefs, for the language they speak, for whether or not they live within the borders of their countries of origin or for any other reason. We light this flame to celebrate our kaleidoscope of diversity, working, loving, and living on the side of love. For this, we light this flame. And now, if you could join me in our unison affirmation, and the words should be in the chat box. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now, please sing along in your own environment with our opening song, We Shall Be Known, by the How We Thrive Choir.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
Each week at UUCD, we include a brief, what we call a UU moment in our worship service that serves to make us aware of and to nurture our connection to the larger body of Unitarian Universalists and the Unitarian Universalist Association that binds us together. For our UU moment today, we highlight one of the few common rituals of UUism, which is the flower communion. The flower communion is observed in UU congregations all over the place as a ritual that celebrates beauty, human diversity, fecundity, and community. And this year, once again, we must adapt the common way that we observe this ritual to our current context of online worship. I'd like to invite you, if you haven't already, to switch your view to gallery in Zoom so that you can see everyone else's video. And we asked you to bring a favorite flower with you today. I don't imagine all of you did, but those of you who did, do you have those flowers with you? And if you could, let me change my view to gallery. Just show them to us in the window and take a moment just to look around at all the different flowers that you see. I don't imagine that any one of these flowers, just like any one of the people in this room are exactly the same in color, in texture, in appearance, in smell. And yet all together, they make quite a beautiful virtual bouquet, don't they? We want to invite you, if you have some compelling thing about the flower that you brought, to share that with one another briefly, if you would. So do that at this time if there's something you just really need to say about the flower that you brought. We'll conclude this flower communion with the original blessing of the flowers that was given in 1923 by Norbert Kopek, who introduced this ritual to his Unitarian Church in Czechoslovakia. So keep your flowers up. In the name of the providence which implants in the heart of the seed the future of the flowers, and which implants in our hearts that unrest which will not be quenched till people live lovingly with each other, we bless these flowers. In the name of the highest, in which we move and take our being, and in the name of the deepest, which makes father and mother, sister and brother, lover and loner who they are, we bless these flowers. In the name of the prophets and sages who sacrificed their lives to hasten the coming of the reign of mutual respect, we bless these flowers. Let us renew our resolution sincerely to be brothers and sisters and siblings, regardless of the barriers which estrange. May these flowers be for us the sign of the glory and variety to which we aspire, knowing the whole while that we are one family, the spirit family, the family of nature. And in this holy resolve, may we be strengthened by the spirit of love, that we ourselves may bloom in splendor of a joyful life, and endeavor to be ever more perfect in our days. We bless these flowers. Amen.
Joys and concerns. It is now our time of joys and concerns, when we offer one another the opportunity to share very briefly what is most on our hearts right now, life's celebrations and concerns. As you do so, we invite you to light a candle in your own space. Through the action of sharing and kindling a flame, we give energy to our best thoughts, meditations, sympathies, celebrations, and prayers. We hold these as sacred in our collective hearts. We would also like to invite anyone new to our community to introduce yourselves if you would like. We welcome you warmly and would be pleased to light a candle in honor of your connection with us and whatever joys, concerns you carry in your hearts. At this time, we invite you to change your view to gallery view in the upper right corner of your screen so that you can see everyone who is here. As you feel led, please unmute your microphone and share your joy, concern, and light your candle if you have one. You can watch these mute signals on the lower left of each person's video stream to see if anyone's signal on the lower left is unmuted. It's best if we share one at a time. Please mute your mic after you have shared. We light one final candle for the joys and concerns that were not spoken by those of us here, and in solidarity with others in our community who could not be with us today.
Finding the right place. It's always been a wonderful moment for me. As Unitarian Universalists, a central part of our worship, in person and online, is the opportunity to practice the art of generosity. I asked Sydney to come and help me do this so that I could say that in our lives, as a spiritual practice and gratitude, it's wonderful that we give, but it's also our gifts to our congregation, the things we share, the things we care, the things we do together. and that we are grateful to you for the many ways you support our community and everything about us, including your financial pledges and offerings. Sydney once said to me, oh yeah, I know, I'm going to tell him, there is so much in your life that you do for others, that money's not just the only way you give. You can give in many ways. Yeah, yes, I know. That Sydney wants you to know that everybody gives from their heart. And that's the heart of giving together. Included your financial pledges and offering, the gifts matter, and the ways that you make this world a better place. Thank you for your passion and your generosity. For those of you making pledges or who want to contribute to UUCD, please do so by visiting www.uucd.org and click on Support Your UUCD for more information about how to donate online. Sydney says, thank you. Our offertory music for today, oh yeah, better than we found it. Real important. Sydney says, remember that, better than you found it. Is that okay? Okay, thanks.
Remembering who we are and what we are called to, which is love. Let us center ourselves. This centering comes from Reverend Julia Corbett Haymeyer. In the face of hate,
we answer the call of love.
in the face of exclusion,
We answer the call of inclusion.
in the face of homophobia,
We answer the call of LGBTQ rights.
in the face of racism,
We answer the call of justice for all races.
in the face of xenophobia,
We answer the call of pluralism.
in the face of misogyny,
We answer the call of women's rights.
in the face of demagoguery,
We answer the call of women. We
Of
answer the
reason.
call of reason, sorry.
in the face of religious intolerance,
We answer the call of diversity.
in the face of narrow nationalism,
We answer the call of global community.
in the face of bigotry,
We answer the call of open-mindedness.
in the face of despair.
We answer the call of hope.
As Unitarian Universalists, we answer the call of love,
More than now,
now more than ever.
now more than ever, let us
Let us take a few moments of silence to center ourselves in the call of love.
Our reading this morning consists of excerpts of a CNN story by Erin Davis and Brandon Griggs. African Americans have long celebrated the legacies of leaders like Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., all formidable forces for change within the Black community and beyond. But as Americans celebrate Juneteenth, the unofficial June 19th holiday marking the abolition of slavery in the US, it's important to remember that these figures don't represent the whole of Black activism. For decades now, there has been another battle for civil rights happening in the Black community, one that history has largely overlooked: the struggle for equality and respect by LGBTQ Black Americans. So here are 7 LGBTQ Black advocates who, facing oppression from both the Black community and white society, live by the idea that we aren't truly free unless all of us are. Audre Lorde, the poet activist who said, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. James Baldwin, the writer and activist from the Harlem Renaissance, who wrote, "To be a Negro in this country is to be relatively conscious, is to be in a rage almost all of the time." Marsha P. Johnson, a trans woman and activist who fought discrimination while struggling with homelessness and mental illness, said, "How many years has it taken people to realize that we are all brothers and sisters and human beings in the human race? We're all in this rat race together." Bayard Rustin, civil rights activist and queer rights pioneer, said, "When an individual is protesting society's refusal to acknowledge their dignity as a human being, their very act of protest confers dignity on them." Barbara Smith, author and mother of Black feminism, began her social activism as a protester for civil rights in the 1960s. She said, "Trust is to human relationships what faith is to living. It is the beginning place, the foundation upon which more can be built. Where trust is, love can flourish." Andrea Jenkins, America's first openly transgender Black woman elected to public office, said, "When I first started, people would ask me, 'Who are my opponents?' At that point in time, I didn't have any physical opponents, but I would say to people, 'My opponents are racism, sexism, and homophobia.'" And Phil Wilson, who founded the Black AIDS Institute, who said, "I believe it is entirely possible that I will live to see the end of the AIDS epidemic, but we are at one of those deciding moments. Whether we end it now or not is totally up to us."
So today we are reflecting on two quite complicated celebrations that take place during the month of June, Juneteenth and Pride. And let's start by remembering a little bit more about what those celebrations represent. Juneteenth is something that African Americans have been celebrating for a very long time, since the day it commemorates, in fact, June 19th, 1865. But it has not always been celebrated by others or so popularly. Gregory Pardlow wrote a letter to the celebration of Juneteenth as if it were a person. The letter is included in the new book, There's a Revolution Outside, My Love, which contains letters written by people of color primarily through the lens of the experience of 2020, COVID-19, and the undeniability of racial injustice brought to heightened awareness by the murder of George Floyd and too many other Black people killed by police. In his letter to Juneteenth, Pardlow writes, "Dear Juneteenth, you're a celebrity all of a sudden? Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for you and for the many Americans who now see how important you are. I don't remember the first time I learned about you, but I do know Black folks have been celebrating you for generations. What took the rest of the country so long to catch on?" I have to admit that convicts me a little bit, because sadly, I didn't become aware of Juneteenth until I was a young adult and have not celebrated it consistently since that time. And even when I did become aware of it, that was really only superficial awareness. And so in observance of the holiday this year, I read a brand new book that just came out a couple of months ago called On Juneteenth from African-American and Texan historian Annette Gordon Reed. And she summarizes the observation's significance by reminding us that June 19th, 1865 was the day that enslaved African Americans in Texas were told that slavery had ended 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. But it turns out that's really just the headline. There was so much more going on in Texas at that time, which was deeply informed by the history of the state itself, a history I didn't know much about either. My education in school was a product of what Pardlow calls historical obfuscation, and our pathological ignorance of the central role African Americans have played in building the wealth, prosperity, and security enjoyed by so many Americans today. I didn't know, for example, that the Republic of Texas seceded from Mexico because Mexico had abolished slavery. Anglo-Texans had been fighting for their way of life, a slave-based economy, since the 1820s, and they thought that a closer alliance with the US southern states would strengthen their position. So they became a part of the United States in 1845. And then 20 years later, on June 19th, 1865, General Gordon Granger left his army post in Louisiana, traveled to Galveston to deliver what was called at the time General Order Number 3, which actually said this. I'm quoting from the order. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. And Black folks began to celebrate. Unfortunately, the idealism of the statement that true equality between masters and slaves was now the law of the land did not manifest in quite that way. Reed says that the order probably should have said, slavery is over and former slaves will now become the equivalent of peons in the land of whites, with severely diminished to non-existent legal, social, and political rights, since that was what really happened. In truth, the legacy of that Texas history and its baked-in racial hierarchy survived long after enslaved people were freed. And of course, while some progress has been achieved since then, remnants of that history and heritage exist still today. Slavery may have ended, but shackles still remain on people and on our society at large in the form of systemic racism. We were able to see that so clearly last year, not only in the violence and resultant protest movements, but in the disproportionate effect on people of color from the COVID pandemic, from voter suppression activities, and so much more. Our collective work for racial justice and equity is still far from over, even these 156 years after the original Juneteenth. The other commemoration we celebrate today is Pride, which honors the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Manhattan. The Stonewall Inn was a bar on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village. It was owned by the mafia. As it was largely illegal to be openly LGBT at the time, it was often organized crime who were the proprietors of establishments that catered to the illegal. June 28th, 1969 was just another routine police raid of the bar to arrest its queer patrons. But on that particular day, they decided to fight back. Now, this was a time when homosexuality was considered a mental disorder and gay people experienced overt discrimination and police harassment. There was a curious law, for example, in New York City at the time, that women had to wear at least 3 pieces of feminine clothing in public or they would be arrested. And people of any gender who dressed in clothing typically assigned to the so-called opposite sex, a misleading phrase on so many levels, were the first and most frequently arrested. And on that night, 2 undercover police women and 2 undercover policemen entered the bar to gather evidence and then to alert the so-called public morals squad who were waiting outside to arrest patrons. But it didn't go as planned that night. Some people refused to produce the identification they were always asked for to prove alignment with their biological sex and to intimidate them with public outing. The patrons who weren't arrested didn't scurry away as usual that night. A crowd began to gather outside the bar, some of them taunting police and others shouting encouragement to those inside who were resisting arrest. People started throwing pennies and coins at the officers and then beer cans. One trans woman whom police had shoved retaliated by hitting him with her purse. When a lesbian, whom others would have called a stone butch dyke, said that her handcuffs were too tight, the police hit her on the head with a baton and threw her into the paddy wagon. Many in the crowd went berserk, and more people were drawn by the chaos to gather in common defiance, including the homeless gay youth who used to sleep in Christopher Park. That gathering and the sense of common outrage that knit together a community of resistance was a tipping point in the gay rights movement. Thereafter, various groups began to organize in earnest, and a hope of liberation inspired people to come out and demand to be treated with dignity, respect, and equality. Since that time, of course, there has been some progress. It is more rare that people are fired from their jobs, denied equal housing, or murdered because of who they are or whom they love, though all of those things still happen. Yet even as we celebrate the 52nd anniversary of Stonewall, we have to acknowledge that this very year, 2021, more anti-trans legislation has been introduced than ever before in history. Over 82 anti-trans bills have been introduced, most of them targeted at outlawing trans women in sports or trying to ban or limit medical care for trans people. It seems more evident than ever that progress in the struggle for dignity and equity for Black and brown people, for queer folks, for immigrants, for Indigenous people, the poor, and more, is a dance. It may be overstating it to say that it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because it's not that cut and dried. True and lasting progress takes a long time. It requires sustained attention. But there are ways that we can advance progress. And one of the ways I think we can do, this is really where I want to focus today, is to really lean into what we have learned and are learning about intersectionality. For example, I wonder what it would be like if we took our understanding of the interdependent web of all life and actually linked our common struggles for justice. What if we were as passionate about the rights of people whose lives and histories are very different from ours as we are about our own? There are many ways of describing privilege. One of them that's been recently making the rounds is this: privilege is when you think something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. One of the ways that current power structures stay in place is by isolating various oppressed peoples and communities from one another and tricking them into thinking they must compete with one another in their struggles. Years ago, during a UN conference for women, the Indigenous Australian artist, social worker, academic, and activist Lilla Watson was credited with saying, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." Now, Watson isn't comfortable, I should say, with the attribution of the quote because it originated from a community of Aboriginal activists who came up with the phrase together. But it's still powerful, isn't it? What would it be like if we really got the heart of that sentiment, that our liberation is bound up with one another's? We are not in competition for a limited number of rights and freedoms, but the hierarchy has fooled us into thinking so. True justice, though, can never be for just us. Understanding, embracing, and leveraging the power of intersectionality is one way that we can move ourselves out of that mindset. Let me offer this definition and example of intersectionality. This comes from Maria Lugones, and she writes this: intersectionality reveals what is not seen when categories such as gender and race are conceptualized as separate from each other. The move to intersect categories has been motivated by the difficulty in making visible those who are dominated and victimized in terms of both or multiple categories. Though everyone in capitalist Eurocentered modernity is both raced and gendered, not everyone is dominated or victimized in terms of their race and gender. Kimberly Crenshaw and other women of color feminists have argued that the categories have been understood as homogenous and as picking out the dominant in the group as the norm. So for example, women picks out white bourgeois women. Men picks out white bourgeois men. Black picks out Black heterosexual men, and so on. It becomes logically clear that categorical separation distorts what exists at the intersection, such as violence against women of color. It is only when we perceive gender and race as intermeshed or fused that we even see women of color at all. And I would add to her observations that it is only when we perceive sexuality and race as intermeshed that we can see LGBTQ people of color, or that only when we perceive class and sexuality as intermeshed that we can see poor queer people, and so on. My colleague Irene Monroe offers a concrete example from her own experience relevant to today. She says, as a fractured group, both politically and socially, African-American LGBT people reside as resident aliens who too often live bifurcated existences in both communities. While our Black skin ostensibly gives us residence in our Black communities, our sexual orientation most times evicts us from them. And while our sexual orientation gives us residence in the larger LGBT community, racism constantly thwarts any efforts for coalition building, which then weakens the larger movement for sexual equality. It's a sad truth that historically, certain progresses to confront oppressions have been made both intentionally and unintentionally by perpetuating or failing to confront other oppressions aimed at different groups. But leaning into a growing understanding of intersectionality and our common struggle for justice could be a way out of that pattern. Now, I'm not trying to say the struggles are all the same. They are not. There are very particular ways in which prejudice is inscribed and implemented to systematically marginalize and oppress specific groups of vulnerable people. What is common, however, is that it takes protest, pride, and hope of progress on the part of each of those groups to confront and reform those systems. And if we all worked together, which requires that all of us deconstruct the isms in us that aren't our own, because our liberation is bound up with that of others. If we all did that, it would not nearly be as difficult to make the changes that are necessary to liberate and benefit all people. Now, so far, I've been a bit heady in talking about this topic. So I want to move towards wrapping up by trying to illustrate my point in another way. So I'd like to share with you a poem that I wrote a number of years ago called Sacred Circles. Will the circle be unbroken? The sacred chorus of this question still resonates in me. The answer, as I understand it now, only if it morphs and moves. I stood outside it once, longing to be embraced, to know the warmth of that connection, to feel the soft and comforting essence and ease of belonging. It was cold there in the border zone, with the icy recognition that I was not the same, did not fit the mold of what it meant to be woman, man, lover, loved. My heart began to thaw the day I found the words to name myself. When I spoke my creed aloud as call, saw your eyes flash recognition, heard your words, me too, form the response. My body also melted then, into yours, into itself, into something more. And then there were two, bodies, souls, beings together, yet still outside, poised on the edge of the inner circle, anxious, aching for the adventure of border crossing. Something sacred this way comes. That thought echoed in my head the day the circle breathed and grew, and we at last found home inside. transformed by spirit, surprised by grace, reunited with all that is holy. It took some time to readjust, to let our tears of joy wash away the grime of the layers of dirt and shame, the accumulated film of closet dust. The comfort of belonging, the confidence of knowing one's place in the family of things, the security of finally fitting in, these are intoxicating feelings. It can be tempting to forget the way things were outside, cold, fragmented, isolated, lonely. Once safely tucked inside, one has to really try to see the circle's edge, to hear aliens of a different sort cry out in the same haunting way that we once did. Yet try we must. For the edge is where the sacred dwells, where the water breaks, where the perimeter is breached and life breaks through. Without the edge in sight, we can only see what was and is, never what is longing to become, what is in fact meant to be. It occurs to me that the strength of the oak is seen most clearly in its rings, that mark each place where boundaries gave way, where something new was formed, where end blurred into beginning, where hard fixed limits faded to elusive promise. Could it also be the strength of the sacred circle is the same, most visible in the remnant of rings that mark each place where border crossers kissed the dew-damp grass of home, where spirits lovingly fused with supple flesh, where definitions changed, where labels lost their meaning, where the connection we all share was briefly and beautifully exposed for what it is. Will the circle be unbroken? Yes, the sacred chorus of this question still resonates in me. The answer, as I understand it now, only if it morphs and moves. Alfonso David, the president of the Human Rights Campaign, says what many of us know from experience, that progress in the fight for equality has always come in fits and starts, but nevertheless marches forward. My hope, my deep, deep hope, is that we can help it march faster, more forcefully, and more effectively forward by working together, not purely out of self-interest, but out of human interest, genuine connection, and a true commitment to justice for all. May it be so. Our closing song this morning is Keep On Moving Forward. Please sing along in your own environment as you feel it. Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Sigamos adelante. Siempre adelante, siempre adelante, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on loving boldly, keep on loving boldly, keep on loving boldly, never turning back, never turning back. Amaremos con pasión, siempre con pasión, siempre con pasión, sin volver gonna reach across our borders, reach across our borders, reach across our borders, never turning back, never turning back. Vivamos sin fronteras, siempre sin fronteras, siempre sin fronteras, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on being hopeful.
Gonna keep on being hopeful.
Keep on being hopeful. Keep on being hopeful. Never turning back. Never turning back. Tenemos esperanza. Siempre esperanza. Siempre esperanza. Sin volver atrás. Sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on moving forward.
Keep on moving, keep on moving.
Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back.
We're
Never turning back. Never turning back. Never turning back.
Please join me in extinguishing our chalice. The words should be in the chat box. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Our closing words this morning are from George G. Brooks, who said, "May the love that gives to life its beauty, the reverence that gives to life its sacredness, and the purposes that give to life its deep significance be strong within each of us and lead us into ever deepening relationships with all of life and with one another. Amen, and may it be so." Our virtual worship has ended, but our connection to one another and the earth endures. Go blessed to be a blessing. And we will have breakout rooms. If you'll stick around for just a moment for a virtual coffee hour, you can chat with one another.